So my name is Simon Riggs. I'm the CTO at Second Quadrant, but most relevant to today's discussion is that I'm a major developer of Postgres and one of the committers. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the general topic of administration. So this is rated in the program as an intermediate level talk. And that means that I'm not going to go into some of the depths that might be possible. So I've got a number of general things to talk about, and then we can open that up for questions. I am going to cover various topics, and if anybody wants to ask a question at any point, you're not going to interrupt my flow or anything if you just stick your hand up, and then we can address a particular topic as we come to them. So I'm going to talk about quite a number of different things, but as I say, at a fairly general level. I'm going to start off by talking about what administration actually is and what topics it covers. One of the things that I wanted to do with this talk is to try to draw together some of the themes that have been made in other people's talks. There's been talks about performance, there's been talks about how to manage vacuum and things like that. But there's no real sort of single talk bringing together some of those thoughts about administration. So that's what I'm attempting to do here, while at the same time making it a useful talk. So what actually is administration? What we tend to think of as administration is things like backups and replication, but actually the topic is much wider than that, and depending on particular people's job roles, they get involved in all manner of things, such as business intelligence, data quality, locating bugs. But the reason for showing that list is that there's a great many tasks that we perform on what I'd call a regularly irregular basis. For example, finding bugs in software. You're not planning to find a bug in the software, but if you're not finding at least one bug in the software you're using each year, then that is because you're definitely not looking hard enough, okay? So all software has bugs. Now, rather interestingly, and this is one of the areas to think about, is we tend to think of a job like administration as the tasks we do every day or every week. But actually, there's a great many tasks that we do quarterly or 6 monthly that are just as important. And it's finding time for those tasks that is really important, but not just finding the time, it's finding the time to gain sufficient skill in those tasks to make sure that they get done properly. And that's one of the themes that I wanted to talk about here. So the question then is PostgreSQL administration different from other server administration? Yes, certainly database administration itself is quite a different topic from, say, managing a mail server. Yeah, that's very clear. What we need to do is constantly communicate the differences between this type of administration and other types of administration to the people around us so that they understand. Now, if we compare Postgres with other servers that are reasonably similar, such as Oracle or SQL Server, you'll see that there's actually a number of differences. First off, the Postgres theme is it just works. And that is a policy that we follow in the development community. It's not just luck. Over a period of years, Postgres has made huge numbers of minor changes to things like the documentation, to the user interfaces, to make sure there are no strange little quirks, and that's phrase strange little quirk is probably the main differentiating factor of Postgres versus MySQL, for example. And our approach to robustness is particularly important in the sense that we're actually fixing Postgres bugs. So when we release software to you, we will do that when there are no known bugs. Okay, so if you install a new version of Postgres, it will not be because there are some crappy things that were there because we felt we needed to ship on time or something like that. So when you install Postgres software, it's got no known bugs at that point in time, which is very valuable. So there's a complete policy within the project that we're going to implement this phrase, it just works. And what you will see over time is a gradually reducing number of user-settable parameters. Now, for me, as an administrator, as a user of the software, I find that quite irritating because I'd love to fiddle with all the little knobs to make it better. But what we're actually doing there is we're responding to a more global need to actually reduce the cost of ownership. So although we could probably make Postgres just slightly better if we gave you a couple of hundred little knobs to tune, overall that wouldn't necessarily make your life any better when you've got 10 or 100 databases to fiddle those knobs on. And what you would actually end up with is a situation where you're going to greatly increase your cost of ownership without significantly improving the actual state of administration on those servers, okay? So I hope that's understood, that we're trying to save you time overall by making the general job harder rather than allowing you specific control in particular places. And what I'd like to talk about now is how that relates to the number of people that administer Postgres, and actually how that relates to the people in the room. So 20 years ago, when I first started getting involved in databases, there were people called DBAs. Now, how many people in this room have their sole job as database administrator? Is that your job title? Okay. Hands up high. Yeah, that's good. That's even more than I thought would be the case. And what I've seen over a long period of time is that actually DBAs are dying out. And over the course of basically a decade of doing training courses on Postgres, I thought that I would be teaching DBAs. That's what I had in my mind. And actually the number of people whose job title was DBA that ever came on our training courses is very low. It's something like 10 or 20%. Whereas if you go back 20 years, it would only be DBAs actually on those training courses. And now we're moving towards this concept of DevOps, which is the sort of fusion of principles of developers and operators. But actually there's been a lot of pushback that I've been reading about in those areas, because what the DevOps movement has meant in a lot of cases is we now sack the operators, because of course the developers are now DevOps, yeah? So we don't need the operators. So now we're in the situation where the developers are expected to do absolutely everything, and if they say no, then they get told, don't you believe in DevOps? Yeah? And that sort of means that we're sort of de-skilling people more and more and more. So some of the thoughts I'd like to get across to you today are that the people in this room, you may not be DBAs, but you are clearly involved in Postgres, otherwise you wouldn't be here at all. But the people that we need to speak to, the people that we need to consider, are the thousands of people that think of themselves as, say, I'm a Django guy, whereas actually a lot of their job is Postgres administration. And for a good many of us, what the situation is we may be the point person within our organization responsible for Postgres, but actually we might just be the point person or the main expert, but actually there might be 10 or 20 people in that organisation that regularly touch the database and do administrative functions on that. And so some of the things I want to talk about really is how we cope with that situation. And the lady this morning who gave a keynote, a lovely keynote, one of the things she said just at the end was that none of us are salespeople, okay? And I'd like to change that round and say all of us are salespeople, because if you're talking to other people, then you are communicating, you are selling your ideas. It doesn't need to be a product you're selling, but you're persuading people of what is right, of the things that you've learnt along the way. And if that ratio is right, that for every one person here, there's another 9 or 19 people using Postgres, but who don't think of themselves as DBAs, it's our job, it's your job to communicate to those people what are the right ways to use Postgres. And, depending on whether you hate the word or not, some people go, yeah, okay, it's selling. Other people will go, I am not a salesperson. I definitely don't sell anything to anyone ever. I'm only a technical guy. And it's like, okay. But the main thing is we need to communicate. And the job these days is not just about making the small tweaks to the systems through our own keyboard strokes, but actually explaining to other people why they need to vacuum their systems, how to design things, having discussions with people about whether or not adding a foreign key to a table might be a good thing. Because what I find when I talk to people is that quite often there'll be one guy that knows Postgres and 10 guys that have been on the Mongo course where they're told that joins don't scale and there's no need for data integrity and things like that. Data integrity just slows down delivery of projects and that kind of thing. So in fact, the role of the administrator, the Postgres administrator, is in my mind very much about communicating to the greater number of developers or DevOps people that have kind of a finger in the pie of Postgres, but they don't consider themselves to have both hands on the steering wheel. Yeah, they kind of just got a vague interest in it. And actually what that creates is a situation where using Postgres, because it just works and because people don't regularly consider themselves to be Postgres people, they then happily use it for months at a time, don't even think about it, and then suddenly something breaks or something strange happens, and then suddenly they're thrust into the world of the DBA and needing to find out things in a hurry, and that does cause problems. And actually in some cases I've seen people that are basically completely de-skilled as DBAs because they haven't ever had to know anything at all about the way the system works. Whereas in the old days with Oracle, you needed to beat it with a stick to make it to do anything at all. And so you kind of became quite familiar with how it operated. And that's now slightly different. So what I wanted to talk about was some advice and guidance that for yourselves, but also to propagate out to other people about how we react to bad situations. So, forgive me if this all sounds trite, and perhaps all of us are a little bit too old to discuss some of these points, but they are important points, and I come up against these myself frequently. So that's the reason why to discuss them. So, first of all, don't panic. I haven't written it up there, but almost every situation where you think there's a problem, it turns out there isn't a problem. You've just managed to persuade yourself that there is a problem. Okay, so that's the first thing is basically just chill out. It probably didn't actually happen. Yeah. So if you go, oh my God, the server's down or something, it might not be. It's probably just your Wi-Fi is broken or something. So keep calm and carry on. Obviously, this is sort of contentious. I don't mean to be rude to everybody, but it's important to establish a culture where we're not blaming other people when things go wrong. Okay. Because when you do that, it very often turns out that it was actually your fault anyway. For example, when you go to restart the server and you go, oh damn, some guy's still on there. I thought I told everybody to log off, and it turns out it's you in a separate window. Yeah. In fact, it's always me when that happens. It's always me. So, but a couple of things to talk about. Unfortunately, a lot of the situations I get called into, well, I say a lot, but tens of percentage of situation, people have done something wrong, and their first instinct is to cover up their mistake. Okay, and quite often what that then means is not only is there a mistake to be resolved, but now it's had some diagnostic clues removed, so it's actually now even harder to resolve the problem. So this is especially relevant when somebody is responsible as a DBA, but because they don't need to touch it except every couple of months, then we get into a situation where people want to kind of back out of it. And I remember one conversation with this guy that was a MySQL administrator, and he was basically trying to persuade me that Postgres had lost data. It's like, yeah, okay. So, how do we think it did that? Oh, okay, yeah. So there's some difficult conversations to be had there, but a couple of points to make is don't delay. If you think you have a problem, then resolve it as quickly as possible. And I mentioned this last night, that Second Quadrant as an organisation gets contacted most on a Friday, and that's where people had a problem on the Wednesday and they tried to fix it all week, and then when they realise, oh crap, now I'm going to have to go home and it's still down, and if I don't now fix it, I'm going to have to work the weekend. That's when we get called. So we get called on a Friday all the time, and really, we ought to be called on a random day of the week, surely. I mean, that ought to be the way of it, but we get called on a Friday. Now, that's for people that don't have a support contract. If they've got a support contract, they do contact us any day of the week. So you can see there's a difference in behaviour about things. And then the final one is don't make matters worse, okay? If you think you've lost data, back up the data you still have, okay? Don't start running clever commands you Googled, because those clever commands are probably going to destroy even more data and make things even worse, okay? So that last one is particularly important, is, if you think you've lost something, back it up. And the last kind of weird people-based observation is systems always break when the main guy goes on holiday, okay? And you think that I'm joking. I'm absolutely not joking, because what happens is the next guy along doesn't know anything at all about it. He looks at it and he goes, oh no, the world is exploding, yeah? And so then he starts, they shut down the server, they run loads of commands on it, and basically those actions break it, okay? So it wasn't broken, they just thought it was broken, and then those actions physically break it. And this guy, poor guy, comes back off holiday, and his server's like in pieces on the floor, where they decided they were going to kind of rip it apart and put it back together. Anyway, so sorry to talk about some of those things. There's some interesting things that we have. In Second Quadrant, we've got enough people around the Pacific Rim that every time there's an earthquake anywhere, the whole support group chats about whether there's been tsunami warnings in their area. And I swear we've got a better system than anyone I've ever seen. So we were talking about the tsunami, and particularly in 2011, where there was a big earthquake and then a very small tsunami. And then a couple of days later, there was a smaller earthquake, and so everybody ignored the tsunami warning, and basically the whole place got totaled by a huge tsunami. So that's another discussion point about monitoring systems. You get this thing where the monitoring system bleeps at you 3 times a day, so when it bleeps at you, you just do nothing, and then that's when the server crashes, and everybody asks you, why didn't, you got the warning and you just ignored it, So be careful about that. What then happened in the tsunami was that in a lot of cases, years before, flood defences had been built, and people started talking about things like flood barriers, and when the flood happened, everybody just sat there doing nothing. And then the flood kind of came all the way up the barrier, over the barrier, and then loads of people died. And what people had forgotten is that the systems were not absolute physical barriers. What they actually were was something that delays the onset of something bad. And actually, when the flood happens, you shouldn't say, I'm okay, I'm safe behind my barrier. What you should actually start saying is, I'll go walking to higher ground now because I now have time to respond to the warning, okay? And that makes me sort of think about the way that we treat things like disk space errors, because in a lot of cases, when you see something like replication breaks and the disks start to fill up with WAL files approaching, that's a very similar situation. You can't just sit back and go, oh, it's okay, we've got new disks. That'll take ages to fill up, and then we do nothing. And then like 2 days later, the server crashes with an out of disk error, and we wonder why, okay? So disk space in particular is one avoidable error that I'd caution you about, is make sure that you've got some monitoring on your space usage on your system, and then sit down and do the math about how quickly that is likely to fill up. Because in some situations, people have said to me, oh, we've got X gigabytes of space, and then you sit and calculate it and they go, 17 minutes worth of disk space, and that's like, that's clearly just not enough, because there's no reaction that you're going to take other than delete WAL files that's going to happen in that time. So that's just some sort of basic things to think about there. So if anybody wants to go into more detail on some of the things I'm going to talk about, please just ask a burning question. That's perfectly fine, because I'm aware that this is kind of basic to intermediate stuff. Okay. So in terms of maintenance tasks, keep auto vacuum turned on most of the time. I have talked in the past about turning it off sometimes, but it does a very important job. And we had, I've seen a couple of people where they turned off auto vacuum and then they thought they were doing the manual vacuums that the auto vacuum was doing, but they missed a couple of tables. And then what happens is you get into a horrendous situation with a vacuum on that table. I saw one catalogue table that had got to be 11 gigabytes in size because it hadn't been vacuumed in like 2 years or something. So that's particularly important. You should be vacuuming as well as the auto vacuum, okay? Vacuum does quite a number of different things. Who went to the vacuum talk this morning? Cool, okay. Actually, unfortunately, I didn't go myself, but did Jim mention that a vacuum sets the all visible bit on data blocks, which means it allows index-only scans to work more efficiently? He did? Cool. I'll say it again then. That's very important for performance. So if you're not running that vacuum regularly, then you're probably missing something. You need to check whether indexes are being used. It's quite easy to add indexes, and it's quite easy to imagine that the index that you added is going to be used, and then for some reason it's not used, and so you get an index sitting there completely unused, and in which case you can get rid of it. So when your system hits memory pressure and things start to slow down, first thing to do is get rid of unused indexes. And there's various scripts around for doing that. A couple of warnings about things that you shouldn't use. Again, these are things that you should be telling to other people as well. Avoid using vacuum full, okay? Around about a decade ago, vacuum full did something good and useful. It doesn't really anymore. It's got a very small use case, and as a result, doesn't do all of the things that we would like it to do. Re-index concurrent, is Michael here? No? Unfortunately, re-index concurrently doesn't exist yet. So if you run re-index on your systems, it will lock your tables for a very long time. So do not run that command. Don't use hash indexes. They're not well logged, which means that you need to have a manual rebuild facility built into your server so that when the server crashes, you rebuild your indexes. It's something we're going to work on, but we haven't done it yet. Don't run with fsync equals off, okay? We have a facility called synchronous commit, which is a much more granular, much more useful facility to allow you to improve performance. So I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, I'm only going to turn fsync off for a while, and then once we're fully loaded, I'll turn it back on again. Yeah, well, it's when you forget to turn it back on again, or the script that you thought turned it back on actually failed, and then you run for months with your main database in fsync equals off. It's best just to don't touch it at all. And I've said, don't do any of those things unless you know what you're doing, and you're probably wrong that you know what you're doing. Thank you.
Just a comment, Simon, too, that the hash thing affects replicas as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just a crash.
Very good point. Basically, don't use them at all. So, RTFM, sorry everybody, but Google does not know all the things you think it does. Has anybody ever Googled for something and Google didn't come back with any answer? Yeah? Okay, well, it's a similar situation, isn't it? If you type in almost anything about Postgres, you'll find some blog somewhere where somebody wrote something they thought was true, okay? It doesn't mean it is true, okay? It's just somebody's blog, yeah? So the manual is the thing that we maintain as technically accurate. I mention this because when we first wrote point-in-time recovery, some guy wrote a blog about how it worked. He got it wrong. And for ages, people were passing links around to each other saying, oh, this guy explains it really well, apart from the fact he explained it badly. So, read the docs, get other people to read the docs, find out which pages in the manual are the places that you need to read. So there's 2,000 pages. It's worth getting to know where it is because Google does not know the shape of the Postgres manual, okay? All it does is return stuff based upon, sort of word ranking algorithms, and it's not good enough for general use. So read what the manual says and also note what it doesn't say, because if there's no restriction on something in the manual, then it's probably okay to do it. You know, there isn't a list of all the things you can do, there's just a list of all the things you can't do, if you see what I mean. So you need to understand what it is that the manual's telling you. We've recently updated the admin cookbook, which is a sort of extension of the manual. It presents information in a slightly different form. The original cookbook was about 250 pages. We've expanded that to more than 450 on the second edition. So it's actually really got a lot of extra material in it. What we did on the first one was actually the publishers rushed it through to publishing on a particular date, and we actually had one weekend to read and correct all of the problems with it, which was not good enough. So this time we said we're going to do a second edition, but we're going to release it when it's ready. And so the second edition has taken about a year to proofread, to go through. So that has gone through extensive technical review. So the stuff in there covers a whole range of material that's worth looking at. Just want to sort of pick out a couple of points from the book to talk about here with you today. Security. Super user is just basically too powerful for you to use in most cases. Now, there's a feature called Security Definer that allows you to create functions that wrap other useful functions. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to give access to particular commands that could only be executed by a super user. You can then give those to individual users. So when something in the manual says this can only be run by a super user, and you go, oh, well, I can't give that to everybody. Yes, you can, okay? Because what you can do is you can wrap the thing that you wanted to give to people in a function and then just grant access to that particular function. So it's a great tool for ensuring that you're not giving too wide privileges away, okay? And I've seen in a lot of cases people, they've just said they either use super user for everything in their system, which is a horrible way of opening up your data for everybody to see, or go the other way and just not allow anybody access to anything. But there is some useful middle ground that you can cover. And then grant the minimal access rights to users as you go. You're supposed to ask questions, by the way, because I'm going to finish kind of like about 10 minutes early if there's no questions as we go. So the next thing to talk about is upgrades, and this is one of those tasks that people actually relatively seldom get to perform in their role as administration. So we release maintenance releases roughly every 3 months, and we will fast track a maintenance release if there's a security problem or a data loss problem or something along those lines. So there's a maintenance release coming up on the 5th of October, and that's also the date when we plan to make 9.5 into the first beta version as well. So that's the date to remember. Maintenance releases are pretty typically, they don't touch the file formats, so you can just do a simple upgrade. One of the things that I regularly talk to people about is make sure they're up to date on their maintenance releases. How many people are running the latest production maintenance release at the moment? Yeah. Okay, so that's can I ask the other question? How many people are not running the latest version? Okay, so that's quite a few people. Now, you know, one of the things I've found quite surprising is that people think that there's risk in upgrading to later maintenance releases, and you know, what you've got to say is that there are known security flaws in some of these maintenance releases. So if you haven't upgraded, then your system is immediately accessible by certain security you know, mechanisms, and that's a poor show. I did have a long conversation with one guy who was running something like 8.3.1 or something like that, and I was like, why are you still on this release? And he said, well, show me any of those things that are relevant to me, you know. So and I then spent the next hour going through it, and I said, you know, you're absolutely right. None of the later bugs that have been reported affect you, you know, but you're still exposed to the security flaws there, and you still need to respond to that. Now, the good news is that we have for many years been building this technology that's referred to as logical replication, and logical decoding is in 9.4 onwards. So once you get to 9.4, we will be in a position where we can deploy that technology for major upgrades to your system, okay? And we have had a system that is described as UDR, which is not a very good name in my opinion, but that technology is going to allow you to do a zero downtime upgrade across major releases. That's one of its main goals, okay? So if you can get yourself to 9.4 or above, then migrating to later releases is going to get a hell of a lot easier. You know, I hope that some of the other presentations have given you reasons, good reasons, why you should be at those later releases. But once you are at those later releases, then we will be able to upgrade you a lot more easily. Okay, so that's some exciting technology to come. When I say to come, obviously, if you're on 9.4 already, then there's nothing to upgrade to yet. So the first opportunity to use that facility is when we go live with 9.5, and then you'll be able to use the 9.4 to 9.5. But obviously, if you're not at 9.4 yet, that technology will not help you yet. So do what you can to get to 9.4, and then for many years afterwards, we'll be able to sort you out with easy upgrades. So, how many people don't use extensions in their database? Blimey, okay, next slide. Good. Yeah, well, that's very good. I'm really happy, actually. Oh, can I just check, are you all asleep? Yeah, maybe. So one of the things, the design principles of Postgres is that it's extensible, and we've actually made it even easier to extend Postgres. So there's more APIs within the server, and the actual process of installing new extensions is a lot easier than it was previously. So what I foresee the future of Postgres is actually what I'd call like an extensible data operating system, where your systems will eventually consist of quite a large number of additional packages over and above the core system. And that's going to be really important for us in the future, because then we've got different release levels. David, for example, is going to talk about the PG Audit extension that we're working on, and there's a great many others like PG Stat Statements and PostGIS that are pretty much essential to creating extensions on Postgres. Couple of viewpoints on scripts. I kind of have this debate regularly with people that say that reduced cost of ownership is only possible with GUIs, and I've yet to see a GUI that allows you to change multiple things in the same transaction. Basically, if you click like a madman all over your database changing things, those things happen immediately and non-transactionally, and after you've made them, you've got no record of your actions, and actually it's quite difficult to come up with basically a manual script of the changes you need to click on the test server and then exactly replicate that on the production server. Whereas if you write a script, you're able to completely test that script executes before you move to the production system. So actually, when people say to me, you've got to have an amazing GUI tool with Postgres, I'd say, maybe. There are some things that are better with a GUI, but they're not all necessarily better just because it's got color and flashing lights. Nobody's arguing with me? So one of the last things to talk about is a lot of the work that we've been doing to extend the alter table command, specifically with regard to the type of locks that it takes. So this sequence of actions here is how you add a foreign key onto a large table on a busy production system. So what we've done is we've broken down the foreign key into two parts. The first part takes the type of lock that interferes with write transactions, okay? But it adds the foreign key without validating the existing data. So what it does is it places on the table a rule that says any new data must pass that rule, in that the foreign key check is made for that data, but we don't yet touch the old data. And as a result, that change is a catalog only change. And so once you have the lock on the table, which might take a minute or two to get, once you've got a lock on that table, that will happen in about a second. Yeah? So you've made that change and then you're away again, and all of your write transactions can then continue. The second command, validate constraint, checks that the existing data follows the constraint that you just added. Now that command does not interfere with write transactions, okay? It takes the same lock level as vacuum, so it's actually running it as a background task, okay? So if you look at how you would add a foreign key on a, say, 100 gigabyte or a 1 terabyte table, that thing would be locked out for hours while it scanned the table, and it would be locked out against all writes, whereas that sequence of commands basically will lock out writes for just a second and then process all of the rest of the things in the background. So that is evidence that Postgres developers care about common administrative tasks, okay? And that's one of the things we've done. There will be many more coming in the future. So the goal of Postgres, as I personally see it, is to make databases with a formally defined schema as easy to use as schemaless databases, okay? Because schemaless is sometimes useful for certain types of application, but for many applications, having a well-defined schema is a good and a useful thing, and we don't want to be blocked from using it because of administrative complexity. Yes?
So that's something I just learned about, so that's cool.
Cool.
Do you have any other examples of schema change type things, index creation, new columns, like any other?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a few commands within the alter table structure that take reduced lock levels or run really quickly just as catalog only operations. So if you add a column, for example, that does not have a default, then you can add that as a catalog only operation, by which I mean it's not going to do anything to the data file. In some cases, if you add a column that needs some kind of manipulation on it, it's got to calculate that for every row in the table, and it's basically just going to lock out the whole table for hours. So we've already optimized add column, we've already optimized drop column, and here you can see some examples. It's worth noting that alter table's got a great many different options, and you can run multiple options together in the same command. So if you do need to rewrite the table, it can do it all in one pass. Okay. So 1 minute left. So my conclusions. You need to be proactive as well as reactive in your administration of Postgres databases. Explore and learn Postgres as you go, and make sure you communicate, because there's a lot of people in your organizations that need to understand why Postgres does certain things and how it does them well. If you don't communicate those things to people, then you can see the marketing department of the Postgres organization is fairly small and is not going to be communicating with those people very well. So it is up to all of us to sell the benefits of Postgres to people in our organizations. So the overall theme of this is that in order to administer your Postgres databases well, you need to communicate with all of the other people that use Postgres. You need to communicate with the developers to report bugs and to hone useful requirements for further changes, but you also need to communicate with the people in your organization to make sure they're using Postgres to its full benefit. You know, we've put useful things in there, so please make sure that you're using them. So if anybody's got any questions after this, I'm happy to stick around and listen to anything that you might want to talk about. So thank you very much.